Good afternoon and welcome to the launch of RIA's Consumer Report 2024 From Values to Riches. My name is Nayanisha Samarakoon and I'm RIA's Head of Policy and Advocacy. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. For me, that's the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to the elders past and present and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. Thank you for joining the launch of the RIA Consumer Report. I will take you through the key findings of the report before a discussion with our esteemed panel. There will be time for questions following the panel, so please do use the Q&A function and chat to send those through, and I will do my best to answer them as I go. So before we dive in, there will be a number of topics we discussed today that will be covered at this year's RIA conference in Sydney. These topics include the impact of current global events on investing, greenwashing, and product labelling. Most significantly for consumers, RIA will be launching the Sustainability Classifications Initiative, which provide the ability, among other things, to differentiate the varieties of RI products covered by RIA certification and to distinguish RIA certified products by how much they consider, address, or target sustainability. So if this report piques your interest and you're looking to deep dive into the issues that we discussed today, make sure you do register to attend the RIA conference at the start of May. So as most of you would know, RIA champions responsible investing and a sustainable financial system in Australia and New Zealand by promoting, advocating and supporting approaches to responsible investment that align capital with achieving a healthy and sustainable society, environment and economy. In Australia, RIA's membership makes up 75% of managed funds, and we progress our mission through our programs, which include working groups, policy and advocacy, certification and research. This year, RIA restructured the research program to sit within the policy and advocacy program, recognising the importance of RIA's research in progressing our policy priorities. RIA works across Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand to shape the rules of finance consistent with our mission. The research program is the foundation which supports evidence-based policy making, which is central to both Australian and New Zealand governments. A big thank you to our sponsors, Australian Ethical and Teachers Mutual Bank. This report is only possible because of the support we received from our industry partners. Thank you also to Lonergan for the survey and data engagement and for assisting with drafting. On to our key findings. This study had 2,003 respondents, which is a great cohort and almost double that of the study in 2022, which had 1,098. This sample was collected to be representative of the Australian population. And you can see there the gender breakdown, 51% male, 51% female, 48% male, and 1% non-binary. We also sought an age spread, as well as covering both capital city and regional areas. Perhaps unsurprisingly, you can see in the top right, there was an increase in the pessimistic economic outlook, which rose to 41% from 27% in 2022. We found that 2/5 of Australians have an overall negative economic outlook for the next 12 months. Women are more likely than men to feel negative towards the economy, while men are more likely to feel positive. This year, next slide. This year, we found that Australians are more aware than ever of responsible investing. Openness to investing ethically is also at its highest at 95%. Only 1 in 20 Australians say that they would never consider investing in an ethical company, fund or super fund. Over 3/4 of Australians are currently familiar with responsible investing. Awareness has increased from 67% in 2022, from just 50% in 2020 to this year being 78%. Younger Australians lead the way with responsible investment awareness, increasing to 87% of those aged under 40 years. We're also seeing with this an increase in the positive beliefs Australians have about investing. 2/3 of Australians believe their investment decisions can influence the health and well-being of Australian society, and 54% believe their investment decisions can influence climate change. 60% of Australians believe that responsible or ethical investments perform better in the long term, and this increases to 75% amongst Australians who are already investing responsibly. 70% of Australians think ethical or responsible super funds look at options which standard funds don't consider. 77% of Australians also believe that ethical or responsible super funds have a positive impact, while 69% trust the claims about a super fund claims about having a positive social and environmental impact. So we can see here that with the growth of awareness and intent to invest, we are also seeing a deeper engagement with some of the potential myths that we see around performance versus investing responsibly, which I think is a great sign. Just go on to the next slide. Looking at action now, it looks like younger Australians are making good on their claims from the last report in 2022, with this report finding an overall shift among younger investors from considering responsible investing to actively engaging in it. The proportion of those currently investing responsibly increased by 10%. 1 in 5 Australians aged under 25 years and between 25 to 39 years old are already investing. This ratio does drop to 16% and 15% amongst those aged 40 to 59 and 60 years or more, respectively. So knowing that savings can make a difference through responsible investing could lead to a change in behaviour. So 65% of Australians would be more motivated to invest if they knew their savings would make a positive difference in the world. This has seen a steady increase throughout the time we've been doing this study, reaching 65% in 2024 from 61% in 2022 and 53% in 2020. And 3 in 5 Australians were motivated to try and save and invest more if they knew that there would be a positive difference in the world. Next slide, please. One of the crucial elements of this is transparency and access to information. What we found was that Australians want to know more about what they're investing in. 3/4 of Australians say that it's important for them to know which companies their super fund, banking and other investments are invested in, and to know the real world outcomes of their funds. However, we did find a disconnect between want and action among Australians, with 74% having never sought information about the underlying holdings about their super fund or investment fund, and 45% would like to know. Women expect more communication regarding the impact of their investments, and they're also less likely to be happy with the information that they do receive and the information available on their websites. What seems to be coming out here is that there is a bit of a disconnect between the desire for information and either not knowing where to find it or not knowing that you can ask for it. Next slide. Right, so we found that almost 90% of Australians expect their bank account and their super to be invested responsibly and ethically. This is the highest it's been since 2020, which was 86%, and then 5% higher again from 2022. Australians have high expectations from their fund and investment providers, and having a super fund, bank, or other investment deliver positive impact in the world is important to 4 in 5 Australians. In the next slide, what's clear is that this study shows that Australians aspire to align their investments with their values and are prepared to switch providers if there's a mismatch. 76% of Australians would consider moving their super or other investments to another provider if there is that misalignment. Women and those under 60 years of age are more likely to change their investment providers if there is a values misalignment. Furthermore, we found that 88% of those looking to enter the responsible investment market in the next 12 months cite that they would consider changing if they did not share same values. So there is a market uptick with those currently investing and then those who are going to invest, showing that there is a market out there for clear information around that alignment between values and investment. But the question then becomes, what issues are important to them? So what we found was that top social and environmental themes, we had a bit of a shift with environmental issues taking a backseat to both human rights related issues and animal related issues in 2024. But it's important to note here that various environmental issues do remain significant for 71% of the overall population and 76% of those who intend to invest responsibly in the next 12 months. And the top categories there are environmental damage and fossil fuel avoidance. 74% of Australians do cite various themes within this category as to avoiding that they wish to avoid when investing. Specifically, animal cruelty is the top individual issue, and Australians are looking to avoid both animal cruelty as well as the use of animal testing for non-medical purposes, which is up from 50% in 2022. In 2024, the main issues Australians want to avoid do revolve around human rights violations, and this is also going to be reflected in some of the new questions that we asked this year. It is up 13% since 2022, and human rights related issues captures labour rights abuses, human rights abuses, as well as violations of Indigenous people's rights when investing, something which was particularly pertinent over the last year. We found that 73% of Australians cite that it's important for their super funds or banks to commit to protecting Indigenous cultural heritage, with younger generations and women more likely to cite this. We also found that for those for those considering a responsible investment in the next 12 months, 83% believe that it is important for their provider to make this commitment. We did have a new category this year, which was around under human rights related to investment in armed conflict, and we found that this was an area that more than half of Australians prefer to avoid. The next slide talks about some more of our new findings. So, likely driven by recent global events and ongoing international conflict, we found that human rights are a top concern. An overwhelming 89% of Australians believe it is important for their financial service provider to protect human rights, including 24% who say that it's extremely important. 48% of Australians say recent events such as war and conflicts have prompted them to think about whether their investments are contributing to human rights abuses. And this increases to 61% who currently have responsible investment and 64% for those intending to invest responsibly in the next 12 months. While there was that importance on human rights, environmental issues remain important as well as climate change. Just the next slide, please. With more than 2/3 of Australians thinking that their investment in their super funds and banks can impact climate change. Australians expect their providers to make commitments, and protecting biodiversity is the most agreed upon commitment Australians expect, at 83% who believe that it's important for their financial service provider to commit to this cause. 4 out of 5 Australians also believe it's important for their investment providers to make a formal commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as making a formal commitment to achieve net zero emissions before 2050. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you. We see here that greenwashing remains front of mind for consumers, an increase of 6% from the last report to 78%, of the Australian population remain concerned that responsible investors engage in greenwashing. And also 79% of Australians say they would be more likely to invest in responsible investment products that have been independently certified or labelled. This is an increase of 4%. And I think the message here is we have very similar numbers to the last report with an increase. Obviously, there's been a lot of scrutiny, a lot of media and discussion around greenwashing. For those certified products, there is what this shows is that there's a level of comfort consumers do get from that certification, and to review how you communicate about your certification and whether it's actually getting to investors, as we've seen. For financial advisors, it's important to understand that this concern is not going away and that consumers are looking for ways to have confidence in the products that they're investing in. So onto barriers to switching to responsible investments. Many Australians want to invest ethically, and the industry could do more to inform and educate future investors about what is available to them. We've seen throughout the findings that I've been talking through that there is an uptick between those who are currently investing and those who are looking to invest in the next 12 months. We also find that 80% of Australians believe there is not enough independent information available regarding ethical or responsible super funds or options within funds. 69% think there's lack of credible options, and 63% cite that they lack the time to look at all the options. Cost is another barrier, with half believing that ethical or responsible funds are too expensive. But this may be around perception because it is higher with those unfamiliar with the industry. We do find that there is a promising trend for the future with a decrease in those expressing indifference, decreasing to 7% from 31%. Decreasing 7% from 31 to 24%. Top barriers for switching banks hasn't changed since 2022. What we find is that 84% claim to not have enough independent information, with women being more likely to say so. The second most common barrier is the perception that there is a lack of credible options to choose from, and 72% believe that ethical alternatives are more expensive. 54% do believe that they don't have enough money in their bank, so it's not worth changing. And we find that in a new category, 40% believe ethical banks perform worse in the long term. There are gender differences, which I've been talking about a little bit throughout. We do find that the barriers to switching and investigating ethical super funds and investment options and banks are perceived differently between genders. While women have a consistently more positive attitude, they have cited that they lack the time to look at options. For banks, lack the time to look at super funds, and then generally find it too hard to switch banks. And there is also a difference in perception about transparency and credibility. And I think what's clear here is that when communicating, it is vital that the communicators, so the providers, the issuers, the super funds, the banks are tailoring that information specifically for the demographics that are receiving them, and taking into account that systematic pressures that are existent and applied differently. On the next slide, we talked through financial advisors. Ethical consideration remains important even during times of increased economic uncertainty. We do see that return to that switch to prioritising return maximisation as 61%. But what we do find is that it's the second one, 52%, it's still very important for knowledge about responsible investment options. We found that this shift could be influenced by the more pessimistic economic outlook in 2024, which did rise, as I mentioned, from 41% to from 27%. And we found that consumers with a negative economic outlook are much more likely to prioritize return maximization. 66% of those with a negative outlook prioritize maximizing returns compared to 57% for those with a positive or neutral outlook. Despite that change in that top priority, like I said, it is still important for financial advisors to be knowledgeable about their investment options, their responsible investment options, particularly with those looking to invest in the next 12 months, being more likely to have such expectations. The importance of what we find is that the importance of those ethical considerations in financial advice does persist during the times of increased uncertainty. And that balance between ethical considerations and financial outcomes gains more significant as consumers navigate this challenging environment. So I have just spoken for quite some time. I'm going to pause there and see if we've got any questions. We've got one from Callum. Is there any separation of these results by retail and sophisticated investor status? I don't think there is to that degree, but I will have to go back and have a look. There'll obviously be some cohorts that are more likely to be retail. We do have a breakdown of investment value, but Callum, that's something that I can follow up. We go to the Q&A, no open questions. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'm very happy to introduce our panel. So from our sponsors, we've got Maria Loyez, who is the CCO at Australian Ethical Investment. Maria is responsible for sales, marketing, customer experience to help drive business growth. Maria has more than 20 years in strategic marketing and leadership experience, having previously held roles in Neobank Vault, Society One, OFX, AMP, Optus, and Virgin. Hi, Maria. Thank you for joining the panel.
Hi, yeah, nice to see you.
You too. And we've also got Corin Milllais, Head of Socially Responsible Banking at Teachers Mutual Bank Limited. The bank has over 220,000 members and $10 billion in assets. Corin has over 25 years experience across corporate policy and NGO sectors, both in Australia and internationally. And this includes CEO of the Climate Institute, MD of Climate Care, CSR lead at Westfield and Mirvac, so many, Corin. Climate campaigner at Greenpeace, community forestry in Uganda and St. Lucia, a wealth of experience. Hi, Corin. Thank you for joining the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Just a reminder again to send through Q&A after the panel discussion, and we've got a few coming in, which I'll get to after that. So let's start with key insights from the report. Maria, would you like to go first?
Well, congratulations on the report. It's really great reading and great to see it again. So I guess I was really pleased to see that the research kind of backs up the continued demand for responsible investing that we're certainly seeing. So I think 90% of Australians expecting their super or investments to be invested responsibly is a great response. And the fact that 4 in 5 say that it's important to have a super fund that's delivering a positive impact in the world is also a really great. And also, of course, 76% of Australians who'd consider moving or switching if they found out that their current fund didn't align with their own values. Is also, I think, great testament to the kind of the rise of responsible investing. There's probably some other things to talk about there, but
thanks, Maria. Great place to start. What about you, Corin?
Thanks. Yeah, there's a wealth of data in there for everyone to dive into. I mean, the one fact that stuck out for me was about the 90% of consumers, and that the demographic of that was only really 39% of 18 to 39-year-olds. So that demographic that demographic of people are going to become far more influential. And what the report says is that that group is taking more action today than the others. So obviously, we all know that Gen Z millennials are more interested in this work. So inevitably, as it grows, this is the cohort that cares most, taking action today, and will become our customers, employees of the future in the next 5 years. So that to me was the key take home.
Right, that's such a good point. I might go back to you, Maria, and on that demographic. Any further insights?
Yeah, look, I did find it a shame to see women citing kind of low balance as a kind of barrier and a reason not to switch to responsible investing. I think it's I mean there's a number of issues with that in itself. The fact that women are got there's a higher chance that women have low balance, but I think we're not quite clear the reasons for that. There could be that the low balance means they don't think it's kind of worth it. But actually, when you put all of those low balances together, they actually are actually a really significant value in entirety, and so it probably is worth it. But also, you wonder whether that might be as a result of kind of a perception of low performance, which has been a myth that's kind of perpetuated in this industry. And I think it's a shame that if that is what's causing it, that people think that they have to sacrifice performance to be able to to invest responsibly, because you can have both.
Yeah, that is a good point, and it's one that we can't seem to shake either. It does continue to persist. Maria, I'm interested about what you thought about trigger events. What are your reflections from the report?
Yeah, well, I think it's really evident that experience matters, and I think we saw kind of the kind of a big boost in the rise of responsible investing, unfortunately, in line with kind of the 2020 bushfires, and then we've seen kind of corresponding kind of boosts with floods, and then more recently with conflicts and other events. So I think that you can't. There is definitely a correlation there, and I think that people are feeling quite helpless about how they might be able to influence change in the world, and I think they're starting to realise the power of their money, and that's something that they can really take control of, which I think is encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. Corin, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, the number in the report is that 48% of people, which is a high number, when they experience something triggering, such as a bushfire, a flood, or external event about an ethical crisis, they're prompted to think suddenly very differently about those issues. So I think that's a non-linear perspective, and that suddenly these future shocks that are going to come, and we all know there'll be more of them, will trigger people into different activities and events. And whilst it doesn't mean that in the next bushfire we're all going to get 10,000 members, but these events do have a non-linear threshold about them. It's worth thinking about how they will unfold and how to respond to those.
Yeah, that's great, Corin. I'm conscious that we seem to be having once in a 100-year weather event almost monthly lately. So I imagine those trigger events will happen more and more. We are seeing some barriers to ethical investing. We look at barriers every study. Interested, Maria, do they align with your experiences?
Yeah, look, we're obviously seeing that the research tells us that Australians are as keen as ever to invest in line with their values, and indeed we're seeing nearly 3/4 or over 3/4 of Australians saying that they would switch if they found out that their investments weren't in line with their values. So I think there's a couple of issues here. I think the first one is that consumers are perhaps not realizing where their investments actually are, and that they might actually be invested in a fund that's not sort of treat a label, or actually not invested responsibly when they think that they might be. And then the second one is kind of what are the barriers to investing responsibly, and I think there's some other research that we have shows that we do have a cost of living crisis, and there's some mental availability and or lack of mental availability to worry about super, which is a kind of longer term proposition, and that can be holding people back. But there's obviously greenwashing that's kind of factored in here, and we see that 78% of people are fearful of greenwashing, and so That's a concern. We have also seen that, consumers, when they have credible third-party data that allows them to kind of see where their investments go and they can trust it. It does provide a trigger as well. We saw, end of last year, the ABC did a kind of an expose on fossil fuel investment in super funds. And we definitely saw that as a trigger event for a lot of customers who were surprised to see where their investments were going and, wanting somewhere credible to put their investments.
Yeah, great. So I guess in that way, the trigger events can come from multiple places for both members as well as member queries. We're still talking about greenwashing. Maria, is this all being driven by that fear of greenwashing?
So look, I think there's a number of different factors, but I think we're seeing in this report that greenwashing is definitely a large factor, and I think with that insight around the third-party sources, in this report we see also that consumers are looking to third parties to help validate their decisions. And we certainly saw that when we've seen credible news reporting. And so it would be great to hear, Nayanisha, how RIA is going to support that, particularly with responsible returns. You've got a great resource there. How can we promote that a bit further and kind of help consumers to make the right decisions?
Responsible returns is free of certified products, and it identifies the sustainability factors that a certified product both invests in or avoids. One of the other aspects that we're adding to this certification is, like I mentioned right at the start, we'll be launching at the conference this year Sustainability Classifications Initiative, and that will provide the ability to get more information out of those certified products by differentiating the varieties of products covered by the certification and distinguishing the certified products by how they consider, address, or target sustainability. So I guess RIA has, in a way, always been in this space of providing that next layer. What we are seeing from the policy space is the government is now interested in a product labelling regime, and we are working closely with them. And part of that is to make sure that we've got full coverage and a set that also allays regulatory concerns as well, which is quite important. Corin, from banking perspective, what are you seeing?
Well, it's a long story about why people don't switch banks, which would take another hour, but it's harder to switch banks, I think, generally. I mean, like from a banking point of view, I mean, in terms of retail banking, which is essentially your transaction account, your credit card, and your mortgage, if you're lucky enough to own a home, those are the main products that, almost 20 million people have. What you said is there's a lack of independent information about which banks are more ethical or well, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's no standard industry data or label or definition. And so what you have in the marketplace is lots of sort of random surveys and media articles, what is the best ethical bank? What is it? And that's the kind of story you see in the Herald or the Age or the ABC. And they're different based on that perception. Usually that list, you'll find mutuals on it. You'll find Indigo Bank on it, and there's probably 4 or 5 of us who are on that list, varying depending on what question they're asking. You don't often see the big 4 on it, but sometimes you do if you look at their green products. So it tends to be non-big 4 that are on that sort of more progressive list, depending how they answer it. But it's not a standard; it's a media article. I mean, the second barrier, there's a lack of credible options for consumers. Well, that kind of hurts for mutual banks because there's probably 6 mutual banks you could join that probably give you a better thing. So that's kind of on us to be made more aware. It's hard when the big 4 are dominating. We certainly, for our members, there's a halo effect about ethical for our consumers, so they see it anyway. And then the third finding was, I sort of found a bit perplexing, that 72% say cost is a barrier for banks, which is kind of strange because there's only really one cost when you move bank, is the interest rate. So the interest rate on your savings account, the interest rate on your mortgage, and that is completely separate to the ethical status of a bank. So I'm not sure what that means. Maybe it just people assume that green banks are just more pricey. And then I suppose for our bank, at least, there's all these barriers, but we kind of, because we don't sell a separate ethical product for bankers, for bank consumers, we tend to have it built in. So it doesn't really matter about the mores of people wanting to buy it, be ethical or not. It's just sort of built in. No one sees a price or a choice, and ethical as a default. So that's kind of solves that, at least from our point of view.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We'll stay with you, Corin. Is there more that industry can do for consumers?
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, you know, what's the phrase? It's not easy being green. And I mean, as I say, the absence of any sort of industry-wide initiative or benchmark or top 10 ethical banks or consumer groups having a third-party view, obviously the response returns thing is there. I mean, there's no compare the market for banks. Maybe we need a ESG MERCAP to do that. So we've got to do what we can, really. And I mean, from our point of view, as a small mutual bank, we've picked two strategies. I don't know if they're the right ones, but that's what we've done. We certified nearly everything we sell for the RIA responsible returns, and that's been across 98% of the products, and that's taken some time. And so that's put about 11 billion of consumer ethical, you know, responsible products in the marketplace. But if we'd launched it as a separate product, I doubt we would have got more than 100 customers. So we've made it built in at zero cost. And the second thing we've done is we've looked at the whole bank, you know, sort of holistically. So, you know, we're one of 9 B Corp banks, which are mutual banks. So we've used a B Corp imprimatur to be the highest standard. They'd really use the gold standard for proof and authenticity. And I think that's really the way to go for consumers. If they see you're a B Corp, then I think that means they think there's something credible about the bank. And, you know, people don't know it, but, you know, 1 million people today are banking with B Corp banks. So there's quite a lot of us around.
That's impressive. Yeah, that's really impressive. Maria, what's your view on what the industry should be doing?
Well, like I think, you know, more consistency in labeling so that people can actually compare products and different investment options and gain more confidence is really critical. But I think, you know, there's onus on you know, us as funds too. You know, 82% of Australians said that they wanted their investment providers to communicate the impact that their money's having on people and planet. And you know, Australian Ethical, we do produce in our annual statements. We do have as well, alongside performance, we do have impact. But you know, we're trying to do more in that space. And you know, I think we see that from this research, only 63% of consumers are happy with the information they receive from their provider. So I think there's probably, you know, I think the labelling will go a long way, but I think there's probably more that we can do as well to provide information to consumers kind of, you know, in line with regulation. And, you know, I think it's this RIA, I think what the work that RIA does is really important, and, you know, having that certification is really valuable. And Corin, yeah, we're also a B Corp, so I think we were the first listed B Corp, and I think it does have a high bar. So you know, that's important for us too.
Right. Thanks, Maria. I think, yeah, we are seeing that there is that gap between wanting more information and a bit of a struggle between understanding who is responsible or feeling empowered to seek more information or expecting that information to come to consumers. So I think that's an interesting point. A bit of a curly one to finish, our last panel question before I go to the Q&A. The study shows that negative views of responsible investment has decreased 4% to just 5%. So we've got just 5% saying that they would never consider it. We also have quite significant figures around belief in how responsible investing can influence climate change, can improve, you know, society. Considering how much we hear about anti-ESG backlash, so-called woke capitalism, do you find this surprising? And what do you think this really shows about consumer sentiment and media noise? Maria, start with you.
Look, I think that when you consider what investments responsible investors make and what we invest in from a positive and what we don't invest in from a negative, I think there's probably some some interest in certain lobbying groups and people to magnify the kind of woke capitalism view and you know, the view that this is something that's not working. I think it's really clear from this research that, you know, 2/3 of Australians believe that this is a way to, as a solution to combat climate change. And so I think that speaks for itself, really. So, you know, I think, you know, the media, I think generally do a really great job, but there's probably some other influences at play.
That's a good point. Corin?
Yeah, the woke question, right? I thought about this because, look, I mean, there is a woke anti-ESG backlash going on, but I think that itself is an elite debate amongst the financial community. I don't think that's what the consumers are saying. It's itself an elitist sort of conversation. I mean, we're not all sitting around in New York listening to Larry Fink, BlackRock talking about investment. You know, from our point of view, you know, our members are people that work, essential workers, teachers, healthcare people, nurses, firefighters. I mean, they're at the very front line of middle income Australia. I haven't heard a single person telling me that we're woke or that they're worried about woke. They're more interested in, you know, the price of electricity or the price of their mortgages. And I think that there's a thirst for authenticity and truth, which perhaps connects back to your view about greenwashing. They want to know the truth about these things. I mean, look, our members don't want us to be woke. What they want is for us to be awake when we answer the phone in the contact center. So I don't think woke is a furphy.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Really good sentiment to finish on. We've got great questions coming in. There is one for the panel around, can the panel comment on interest in investing for positive climate impact and if there has been any erosion of support for this due to recent inflation, higher interest rates, cost of living pressures? So we had some data around negative economic outlook in the report. And this question is really that the positive screening, the positive investment impact. Corin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, there's not that much feedback. I mean, our products, you know, 98% of those products as certified have a sort of exclusion of fossil fuel free investment, and that's quite a common theme amongst a lot of investors and banks now. So I think generally the sentiment is to move out of fossil fuels from a finance point of view, but it's not a day-to-day concern. I mean, certainly people are worried about the price of their mortgages, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the more, you know, I can't link that to anything about lessening off of climate change in our bank. I think they want to have both of those things probably.
Yeah. Maria, any comments?
Look, I think I was surprised to see again, so pleasantly surprised to see, you know, animal cruelty and kind of animal rights so far up the list. And, you know, that's obviously something, you know, we invest for people, planet and animals. And so, you know, that's we were, you know, obviously keen to see that, but a little bit surprised, I suppose, that we're seeing environmental issues. You know, it's fairly dispersed, still, you know, important, but a little bit more dispersed through this in terms of interest. And I just, you know, I think human rights, there's some trigger events there that, you know, are causing human rights to come up the list. And the reality is all of these things are linked, right? Yeah. But I think perhaps we're seeing so many trigger events now for environmental that it's perhaps, I don't know, perhaps becoming a little bit commonplace, which is a concern, because actually some of these things have got broader systemic impacts potentially.
I guess that you mentioned earlier around the mental fatigue around you know, the cost of living pressures as well, and we have had climate environment in the zeitgeist, I guess, the discussions for quite some time. I do have a question around financial advice. So there's a question around the respondents who use financial advisors, which I can't provide. We are looking at doing, you know, considering more financial advice research. But it does talk about what the panel thinks, whether the expectation of advisors asking clients about their values, whether that would be higher if there was greater financial literacy or knowledge of the advice process. Do you come across consumer literacy, Maria?
So it's a bit unclear there whether it's consumer literacy or literacy of advisors of responsible investing. But
Yeah.
so I think we're spending we have got some fantastic advisors that use our products regularly and recommend us to their clients, and we are spending more and more time talking to advisors and helping them to understand the role of responsible investing and the importance of asking clients, because of that's what they want to achieve, and that's a really important part of the of that process. I think financial literacy for consumers is I think there's more that we can do as an industry and across that, and I think we're all working really hard. But there's I think we're all working really hard to try and improve financial literacy across the board.
Yeah. Thanks, Maria. Corin?
Can't give any financial advice. I'm not trained for that, but broadly, I think I think what's happening with this research and thinking about consumer trends and finance is that consumers are finally realizing that the finance industry is causing a lot of the problem that we're seeing in sustainability. It used to be attacking the fossil fuel industry or the chemical company, but now they see the money behind it is the cause of the problem. So I think we're more in the firing line in that sector. And but what people can't work out is why it's easy to buy a Keep Cup or buy a EV or a PV, a financial product, whether it's ethical or not. It's hard to get on a consumer list, and I think that's the missing link. There are a number of groups who are looking at that, like the financial impact of your money, and of course, it's unethical, and those sorts of products are very clear what they do. But I think once people see that the money you have and what it causes has an impact, then that's going to trigger those changes in consumers. For our part, it's hard because you might put, I don't know, 200K into a super fund and it's clear what it is. Our product is a 400K mortgage, but no one's really saying what's that mortgage causing. So once people figure out that there's an impact behind the money, wherever it is, then perhaps that will trigger some more change, as evidenced by the report you've done.
Yeah.
I think the other point on that though as well is that we're seeing a massive intergenerational wealth transfer, and so this report shows that younger people have got more interest, although it's actually still significant at older age groups. But as those older age groups pass on their wealth, there's going to need to be perhaps even more understanding from the advice community around how they can help those younger consumers to align with their values. Otherwise, it looks like from this report, they'll vote with their feet.
Yeah, that's right. I think they are motivated. They understand, they're aware, they're motivated to make change. And there's also a big cohort who are interested, who are looking to invest as well. And I think that's really key for the responsible investment industry. A bit of a flip from climate to biodiversity, being kind of the leading climate concern. What does supporting biodiversity goals and restoration look like at a financial product or certification level? Maria, would you like to take that one with Australian Ethicals?
Yeah, sure. Look, we do have some impact investments that invest in forestry, and we consider biodiversity as part of our ethical research. So we look at all of the things that we invest in and look at overall, is it having positive impact? But we look at kind of, are there any biodiversity concerns? We are particularly concerned, for example, about deforestation as a result of kind of animal grazing, and it's got a biodiversity impact in itself. So I think it would be great to see more impact investment opportunities in biodiversity. It's a tough one. We've got some, but something that we're definitely looking at to kind of expand our portfolios in that space.
Yeah, right. Corin, any views on biodiversity?
Nothing really to add to what Maria said.
No, that's fine. I might use that as a plug for the open consultation for the EPBC Act review, Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act. This has been a big review, and RIA is doing a submission. We're seeking input from our nature working group, and they're due on the 30th. So please do get involved, more the merrier when it comes to a consultation. And on biodiversity, there is such a need for consistency and harmony across those frameworks. We have a number of questions around Indigenous people's rights. There's more interest in human rights issues, including Indigenous people's rights, but then that wasn't reflected in the Voice referendum. So is there a diversion there? Are people interested? But then there's also surprise that that treatment isn't higher on the concerns list. So I guess more of a general question, which doesn't necessarily have to be specific about the topic. In terms of how do you as providers, kind of, please do make a comment on the question itself, but how do you as providers balance the different views and those values from consumers, which can be either it's too high up or it's not high enough, or it's surprisingly high or it's, not high enough. Maria?
Look, I was always, I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question here, but I've always been really sort of, really pleasantly surprised and love to see the RIA equivalent report in New Zealand, which shows Indigenous people's rights so high up on the list. And it doesn't feature here so widely, and maybe that's that is reflective of where we ended up in the Voice. And so I don't know what to say. I think it's I think we've got a lot of progress to make here, I think.
Absolutely. Corin, any reflections? A tough one.
I think the bank's been at an early stage of our reconciliation action plan, so we're not an absolute lead in that space, that's clear. But I don't think we need to wait for a consumer vote on it. I think that it's incumbent on banks like us who think they're doing progressive work to work harder. So there's always something more you can do in the ESG sustainability space, and that's an area that the bank, my bank, needs to do more work on. So it's more to do for us.
Great, thanks, Corin. Got a question around why credentials and certification are so critical. I can give a RIA policy perspective, but I think what's really much more interesting is the industry perspective. Corin, teachers, bank.
Third-party verification endorsement. I mean, for us, it's been something that we felt has been very important, because I suppose before greenwash became a big buzzword, we were concerned about claims could be made. So we've gone heavy on that. So we've used the RIA responsible return certification across our portfolio. We've done B Corp, which is probably one of the ultimate tests of sustainability for a global company. And I think that gives our members reassurance that when we talk about those things, we've done it. I mean, literally, the definition of a B Corp is business as a force for good, and that's what our purpose is. So I think the RIA certification, it provides that strength. Having said that, the Responsible Returns website doesn't generate consumer traffic. Unfortunately, it's not bringing in hundreds of consumers. So people want certification, and then they don't want to sort of read the detail to prove it. So we're doing it because we want to be at that standard, but probably it's the belt and braces approach against the blizzard of other standards that are going on. So we've picked the top tier certifications for our bank to try and have the optimum standard.
Yeah. Thanks, Corin. Maria, any reflections on Australian Ethical's credentials and certification? How it's been critical?
Yeah, look, I think the question is why are credentials and certification so critical? And I think it's because of the greenwashing factor and people wanting to see a third party view. And so I think, as I said, the labelling work that the government is doing will go a long way towards that. In terms of our, I think we're I don't know whether I'm allowed to talk about Morningstar. I mean, we're obviously the RIA leader. We're also a Morningstar ESG leader. We're one of only 8 in the world, and the only kind of Australian-owned company that's a Morningstar ESG leader. So look, I think we've got a lot of credentials in this space, but I do think it's really important to try to give consumers confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably coming to an end. I might just open up and see if you have any final thoughts before we close. No? Great.
Oh, from us.
The report says
I
it
thought you were
all.
waiting
The
for
report
more
says it all. So I think it's
questions.
great
Read
data.
the report is the final.
Yeah, look, I think so. Thank you so much for doing this research.
Yeah. And look,
It's
yeah.
it's really important, and I think there's some really great data in there that shows that we're continuing to see really strong demand from consumers, and you know, we need to continue to ensure that we're providing them with the best information possible on the impact and the influence that their money is making.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Corin.
Thank you.
And a big thank you to everyone who has attended. I did want to, on that First Nations point, we are launching the Darrow Nillan Business and Investor Guide tomorrow, which can help investors navigate that cultural heritage protection. So please do keep an eye out for the launch. It is Minister for Environment Tanya Plibersek is hosting. So we will be doing lots of media around that, and I think that's just another way that we can progress that cultural heritage conversation. A big thank you. We will be in touch. There will be lots more that will come out of this consumer report. I think it is a really great indication of where we are at 2 years on from the last one. So thanks, everyone.